Yesterday I was having a discussion, an argument, but you know, a little, no, it was not an argument, but I felt a bit heated. I was a bit heated, you know, I was a bit annoyed, I was a bit triggered, actually, you know, I was a bit triggered. What's good, you guys? So today we will be going over each and every vulnerable element. Now, I did something similar back in the day, but I was describing every element in relation to every type. Unnecessary. Another thing, I was doing something like this, but it was based on WSS knowledge. Obviously, we know we are original Socionics, we're not doing WSS, so the understanding is different. In WSS, vulnerable element is almost kind of treated like it doesn't exist, like whatever the you don't give a shit about this. Of course, that's not the case with original Socionics. When we look at a vulnerable element, let's say you're reading a questionnaire, or maybe you were trying to figure out if you're vulnerable. We know few things. First, we know that it is conscious. This is something that you are aware of, right? There is a mental process happening in this element. It's not as much like, oh, if you see someone's questionnaire or whatever, and you see them disregarding, they not giving a shit, complete indifference, there's not really much rigidity either. You're probably not dealing with a vulnerable. There's rigidity and there's lack of nuance. Okay, so you're not gonna see, it's gonna be black and white in the way it is used, in the way it is understood, and most importantly, it is normative, conforming to societal expectations, societal standards, objective information. So you are not creating or producing anything new or original or creative in this element. Now, when it comes to SC vulnerable, we are dealing with aesthetics, we're dealing with money, resources, beauty, right? And also will, kinetic energy. So with the pattern with SC vulnerable individuals is that there is quite a bit of insecurity in appearance, quite a bit of insecurity in their will, the application of will. Now, this is very, very common, kind of why they often tend to be third physics in PY, if you are interested in those correlations. But yes, besides the point. The thing with SC vulnerable, for example, like, oh, many people can be insecure in looks, and this is very important to note. That's very true. An SC ego, for example, as an LSI or an ESI, can be also insecure in their appearance. That does not make them SC vulnerable. So this is an important piece of information. So how do you differentiate the difference between SC ego insecurity in appearance and SC vulnerable? So the SC ego, at the end of the day, they dictate how and what is beautiful, what looks good. So if they are insecure, it's because they don't fulfill their ideal that they have in their mind. It is not because society thinks this is ugly or that's ugly. They can be people who have high standards, and because of those high standards, they don't see themselves really meeting that perfect version of themselves, which that can still be SC ego. The SC vulnerable, at the end of the day, is conforming socially. So when you look at appearance, it's someone that can be conventionally attractive, of course, plain looking. They're not gonna be people who use aesthetics creatively or originally. They will blend in, they will fit in. What's acceptable? What's a trend? They might look at trends. What they are relying on that objective information that the SC ego isn't. What makes things beautiful, what doesn't. They have complete entitlement to do so. SC vulnerable struggles with this. They might not know what looks good, what doesn't look good on them. They're insecure about that. There's also problems and reactivity in terms of their will. Someone applying will on them, or them trying to apply will on others. Now we have NE vulnerable, and here you see a common theme with NE vulnerable people and types is that fear of potential. What they can become, who they can become, what they're capable of, what they're good at and what they're not good at. Their internal content, their personality. So imagine you have a situation, maybe you are an NE base and you're talking to this NE vulnerable person and you start telling them, yo bro, listen, you're so good at this, look at this, man, I think you can be even better at this. You should really listen to me because I know what you're good at, I can see that. Let me tell you what you're good at. And now you're telling this person this, you're accessing their NE, who they are on the inside. This is not tolerated by the NE vulnerable. They don't want that. They don't want this done to them, and they don't want this done to other people. Then we have the NI vulnerable, and here there is issues with time. Yes, they are hurried. They're definitely quick moving, quick talking, and others are very quick people, fast paced. So obviously, they have no natural understanding of passage of time. They need to have a clock. They have to have everything scheduled. They will indulge in their routines. They will indulge in a certain schedule, specific things, everything grouped perfectly so they can navigate time. And at the end of the day, for an NI vulnerable, they're afraid of what's going to happen in the future. How events will unfold, they have no idea. Those people are nearly always on time. They have to make sure nothing goes wrong. Things are as planned. An LIE, for example, has a relaxed attitude towards time. They shouldn't be stressed. They shouldn't even need those highly structured schedules because they're NI creative. TI vulnerable, which of course, I didn't understand it myself, For many months, I didn't understand what that means because the reality is, and let's be honest here for a second, let's be honest, from a majority of Socionics in the communities, a TI PoLR is someone who that has no regard for any categorical thinking, no logical thinking, and no logical consistency. So someone who apparently doesn't give a single fuck. Right? Now, this cannot be a TI vulnerable. This cannot be a vulnerable element. TI vulnerable types can be quite rigid with categories, with hierarchies and systems. This is an individual where when there is a shift to a system, a change to a system, this can cause a lot of turbulence for this person. That can stress them out. When people's positions in hierarchies and systems changes, that can stress them out. This is not someone who's just indifferent, like happy-go-lucky, I just don't give a about logic. The TI vulnerable is focused on objectivity in logic, what they believe is the objective accepted logical solution, right? So there's no experimentation with it. There's no playing around with logic. So people who think like, oh, TI PoLR, they just come up with like, they don't care, they bend logic and play with it. You can't play with logic when you're TI vulnerable. That's not what the you do. You adhere to logic, to logical scientific principles. You're supposed to adhere to them because you don't want to deviate from the logical norm. That's the norm, and to you, deviating from a normative logic is a crime. Same way other people deviating from normative logic pisses you the off. So when you see it, you get triggered. When you see it, it annoys you. It causes a lot of response because of that. A TI vulnerable can be skeptical to new systems, new information that they believe is subjective. And they will fight against that. And I'm going to give you an example of what is TI vulnerable in action, in person, right? And how it manifests. What is like deviating from a logical norm? How does that appear? How does that look like? How does that manifest? Yesterday, it's actually hilarious that this shit happened. Yesterday, I was having a discussion, an argument. But, it was not an argument, but I felt a bit heated. I was a bit heated, I was a bit annoyed. I was a bit triggered, actually, I was a bit triggered. I was talking to Saul, of course, shout out Saul. Everyone knows Saul, he's famous, at least in our community. So I was talking to Saul and we had different mindsets. Because someone said something, LSI, one core, and like, I said it cannot work because X, Y, and Z, this is how LSI is described and this is how one core is described. And this person says, well, not Saul, by the way, some other motherfucker. This guy says, well, yeah, but says who, Like, that's not, I don't believe that. And then Saul comes in and says, hey, Naranjo is not God. If I don't agree with it, I don't agree with it. I'm gonna make my own system, which obviously, to me I found that ridiculous. I found it ridiculous. Okay, and I go heated. I go a bit fucking annoyed there because it's like, if you're gonna use a system, use it as system. Like, you cannot be like, okay, I'm using the system of Naranjo, and then we just change completely, like not listen to the core principle of how this type manifests. We change it because we don't agree with him. And to me, that's deviating from normative logic. You are deviating from acceptable normative logic, okay? You're trying something else. You're playing with logic however you want. You are creating your new system. And to me, it's like, okay, well, just say you're using your new system. Don't be telling me that, don't be arguing with me, actually. That's the thing. I don't want to argue with you because we shouldn't even argue. This is not even, to me, if you are not adhering to the system that you claim to be using, if you don't adhere to that, you're not using the fucking system. There's nothing to discuss. There's absolutely no discussion. Your claim is invalidated from the get-go. And he had the opposite view, right? He's like, we can decide what is true. We can decide how I want to use it. I'm not going to follow this logical structure. And it's like, that's the difference between me, which is TI vulnerable, and Saul, which is actually an NE base. I'm not sure if he's like, that particular thing seemed like TI ego to me. But we'll see with time. He was never actually officially typed. But this is an example of how deviating from normative logic is. Then we have FI vulnerable. Now, generally, FI polar people do struggle quite a bit in intimacy, in intimate relationships, personal relationships. They're unsure of how people's sentiments or attitudes can change. They're kind of afraid of their own attitudes and sentiments changing too. The FI polar does follow acceptable, objective FI norms in this area. The stereotype of an FI polar person is someone who just, breaks boundaries however he wants. Morality, he breaks it, he changes it, he plays with it, manipulates it however he wants to his own desire, right? Manipulates relations to because he's immoral. That cannot be FI vulnerable, because what we are just describing is breaking FI norms. It's someone who is breaking them. Oh, I can use this element however I want. Good, bad, however I feel like. Manipulate those motherfuckers, everything. You're describing FI creative. You're not describing FI vulnerable. That's the opposite of that. It would be someone who's actually quite careful about that. Then we have FE vulnerable. They will filter their emotions heavily for what they consider to be inappropriate. And again, just like every other element, the FE polar person follows FE norms. For them, maintaining a controlled mask of aloofness is important to them because they have an inherent belief, right, that expressing their emotions is going to be rude and dangerous and inappropriate even. The emotions are suppressed and they're manifested only at the time of their choosing. Explosiveness of emotionality has to be avoided at all cost. And when they do behave that way, when they explode or they act out emotionally, they lash out, there is an immense sense of guilt and shame that happens with FE vulnerable people. They don't want to disrupt the environment. They don't want to excessively pollute it with emotions. They believe that's not good. TE vulnerable. Here they are rigid with methods, right? Methods of action, methods of workflow, anything like that. Efficiency, pragmatism. There's a lot of rigidity here. Imagine a person who has a certain way of doing things. You might maybe suggest, you might want to help them. You might tell them, You'd imagine a TE base coming up to someone who's TE vulnerable. Hey, you should do it like this method is better. This is not going to be something that the TE vulnerable will react very well to. They don't want to be told this shit. This is not TE suggestive. They don't want you to access their TE at all. It's not that they completely can't use TE. They use TE, but it is in a very, once again, following TE norms. Same way, for example, I'm TE mobilizing. How do I use TE? Do I make things up my own self with TE, create my own methods? No. I'm watching a YouTube video on how to actually do something. What's the proper technique? I'm literally borrowing this for myself. I am learning it like this, because otherwise I cannot create shit on my own. Similar story here. But the difference is I'm receptive to changing of methods. I want to seek that kind of help here. Like, give me different methods. How do I do it better? I'm trying to learn. I am trying to better. I'm trying to learn it. Right? And TE vulnerable doesn't want to do this. So in general, they're just not sure how to work effectively. They're not sure if their movements or workflow is logical or isn't logical. Then we have the SI polar. Then we have the SI vulnerable people. Hygiene, taking care of their health. All the how this is done, they will follow SI norms. There's a lot of rigidity here. SI vulnerable people value the well-being of other people. Of course, he doesn't want to deal with it. He doesn't want people to access his SI at all. Something happens, he has a very rigid way of doing SI things because he believes this is how it should be, even though there's no nuance. So hopefully I did not forget any element, and that's pretty much it from me. I tried to keep it concise. I tried to keep it simple with my own words, Those are my own words. So again, if you have any questions, if you maybe think I could have worded something better, write down below, comment, make the comment section alive, okay? See you guys later. I'm out and I'm bouncing.